It was just after 6 in the morning when Aidan Brody opened the creaky front door of his cabin in the Adirondack woods. The air was thick with pine and damp with early dew. Aidan, a former journalist turned reclusive writer, hadn't yet shaken off sleep. Dressed in a worn flannel shirt and scuffed boots, he stepped outside, dreaming of a strong cup of coffee. But what greeted him on the front porch shook him awake faster than any caffeine ever could. Standing just feet away was a large black bear, not moving, not growling, just standing there, its breath heavy and labored, its thick coat soaked in patches, trembling as though it had come through some terrible storm. Aidan froze. Every instinct screamed for him to run or grab his rifle, but something about the bear's eyes held him still. They weren't the wild, angry eyes he expected. They were wet, software, human-like. The bear wasn't just there, it was grieving. And then he saw it. In the bear's mouth, hanging limp like a rag doll, was a bear cub. Tiny, lifeless, its head tilted to one side, its legs dangling with no sign of strength. It looked heartbreakingly small. Tears streamed down the mother bear's face, real tears. Aidan had never seen an animal cry like that. The sight cut through every fear he had. This wasn't a threat on his porch. This was a mother in mourning. And in that quiet, frozen moment between man and beast, Aidan realized she had come to him for help. Aidan's hands trembled slightly as he stood there, unsure of what to do. Just moments ago, he'd been thinking about coffee and pine-scented silence. Now, a grieving mother bear stood on his porch, her cub limp in her mouth, and her eyes full of something that looked an awful lot like trust. It was the kind of moment you never think you'll be in, a moment where instinct wrestles with compassion. He didn't run. He didn't reach for the old hunting rifle hanging on the kitchen wall. Instead, something deeper rose inside him, a quiet understanding. With slow, measured steps, he backed into the cabin. The bear followed, not with threat, but with a strange, heavy gentleness. And then, as if guided by something older than fear, she laid her cub on the wooden porch, so softly it nearly broke Aidan's heart. She sat back, watching him, not growling, not moving, just waiting. Aidan knelt beside the cub, who looked no bigger than a medium-sized puppy. Its ribs stuck out, one ear was bloodied, and its breath, if there was any, was too faint to feel. Against every instinct he had, he scooped the small body into his flannel shirt, cradling it like something borrowed from another world. Then he slipped back inside, leaving the door just slightly open. Inside, he moved quickly, laid the cub on a towel-covered couch, found a space heater, dug out extra blankets. Everything was guesswork, but he worked with urgency. He called Rachel, a local farm vet and old friend, breathless and unsure how to even begin. "Rachel," he said, "I have a bear cub in my house. It's hurt. The mother, she brought it to me." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Okay, Aidan, tell me what you see. We'll figure this out." The hours that followed felt endless. Aidan sat beside the tiny bear cub wrapped in layers of towels and flannel, its body barely warmer than the room around it. Every few minutes, he leaned close to check for breath, sometimes catching the faintest rise of its chest, sometimes nothing at all. He whispered softly, as if his voice could anchor the cub to this world. "Hang in there, little one. You're not alone." Following Rachel's instructions, Aidan made a warm honey water mixture and gave it drop by drop with the corner of an old baster. At first, the cub didn't respond, but then its tongue twitched, just barely, enough to keep hope alive. Outside, the mother bear hadn't moved. She remained at the edge of the porch, a silent sentinel watching every flicker of light from inside. There was something profoundly human in her stillness, the way she waited, not with fear or fury, but with trust. When Ginny, the wildlife rehab specialist, finally arrived in the late afternoon, she stepped inside and stopped cold. "You weren't exaggerating," she breathed. Then, moving quickly but gently, she examined the cub. After a long silence, she looked up. "This is a bite wound, a big one, likely from an adult male." Ginny explained how, in the wild, adult male bears sometimes attack cubs to push the female into mating again. "It's brutal, but it happens." "The mother must have fought him off," she added, glancing toward the window, "and then brought the cub here, to you." They all sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it settling in. A wild animal, driven by desperation, had chosen to trust a human. And now that human was doing everything he could to return that trust, with nothing more than warmth, water, and hope. Over the next 2 weeks, the little bear cub began to change. Slowly, at first, a twitch of the paw here, a flicker of the ear there, and then more boldly. Aiden watched in quiet wonder as life returned, one heartbeat at a time. The cub no longer lay motionless, but began exploring the edges of the living room, sniffing old boots and curling up in the laundry basket like it had always belonged there. Aiden gave him a name, Baxter. It came naturally, as if the name had been waiting all along. "You look like a Baxter," he said one morning, and from then on, that's who the cub was. Baxter became bolder with each passing day. He tried to climb the couch. He pawed at the doorframe. Once he attempted to chew on a slipper and fell asleep halfway through. And Aiden, once so used to the silence of solitude, found himself talking out loud, laughing softly, letting his heart open in ways it hadn't in years. And yet, even in the warmth of those moments, he never forgot. Baxter was not his to keep. Each morning, without fail, the mother bear returned. She didn't approach the cabin but stayed within view, just at the tree line, watching. She never made a sound, never stirred up trouble, just waited. Her presence was a gentle reminder of the wild bond that still existed beyond the walls of the cabin. Aiden knew the day would come when Baxter would have to go, but he also knew that something unspoken had formed between them. Not ownership, not taming, but a brief crossing of paths. A moment where two different lives touched, healed, and learned to trust. And in that short window of time, a wild cub found shelter, and a lonely man found something to care for again. The peace didn't last forever. One morning, Deputy Louise Gentry knocked on Aiden's door with a clipboard in hand and a hesitant look in her eyes. "Word's gotten out," she said. "Wildlife Services is coming in 3 days. They plan to relocate the cub and possibly the mother too." She paused, then added more softly, "You've done something incredible here, Aiden. But this isn't going to stay quiet." That night, Aiden sat in his living room, Baxter curled up by the heater like always. The little bear was stronger now, even playful, but still looked to Aiden with the innocent trust of a child. And Aiden's heart broke a little more with every glance. He knew he couldn't let someone else take Baxter away. He wouldn't let Baxter's story end in a cage, or worse, separated from his mother. At sunrise, Aiden packed a few essentials, a blanket, a bit of honey, and an old tennis ball Baxter liked to nudge around. He gently lifted the cub into a crate lined with soft towels and drove deep into the forest, far from roads or ranger stations. He parked at the base of a pine-covered ridge and opened the crate. Baxter blinked into the morning light, sniffing the familiar forest air. Then he looked at Aiden, hesitant. It was as if he knew something was different. A rustle came from the trees, and then there she was, the mother bear, watching, waiting. Baxter stood still for a long moment, caught between two worlds. Then, just before turning, he pattered over to Aiden and pressed his small face against the man's knee, a soft, quiet gesture, one Aiden would never forget. And then, with surprising grace, the little bear turned and ran to his mother. They disappeared together into the trees, leaving Aiden alone in the clearing, heart full, eyes wet, but soul at peace. The cabin felt a little emptier when Aiden returned. The silence that once comforted him now carried a different weight. He folded up the blankets Baxter had slept on, placed the worn tennis ball back on a shelf, and packed away the makeshift water bowls and towels into a box labeled simply Baxter. He couldn't bring himself to throw them out, not yet. But even as he resumed his quiet, solitary life, something had shifted inside him. He found himself stepping out onto the porch more often, listening to the wind in the trees, watching the edge of the forest where the bears had disappeared. He didn't expect to see them again. And yet, that fall, just as the leaves turned gold and red, a small surprise appeared on his porch, a neat little pile of wild berries, not scattered, not random, placed, as if someone, or something, had arranged them with care. Aiden stared at them for a long time, then smiled. Every year after that, like clockwork, the gifts returned. A perfect pine cone, a smooth heart-shaped stone, a cluster of moss tied around a twig. All was quiet, always in the same spot on the porch. No paw prints, no sign of who had left them. But Aiden knew it was their way of saying, "We're still here, we remember, we're grateful." He never told anyone, not really. Some stories are better kept between the trees and the wind, but deep down, he held those gifts like sacred notes from a friend he'd once helped and had to let go. Aiden learned something in those seasons of quiet giving, that trust could cross the boundaries between wild and human, and love, the kind that truly matters, sometimes means knowing when to say goodbye.